right, gang, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're continuing kind of with the middle 1/3 of our class on the sort of the wildlife characteristics of human recreation site users. So we're going to talk about people first at kind of an individual level, like we did on Wednesday, with stuff like what's their degree of specialization, kind of per person. You might have literally 1 million visitors who are there at your park for the first time, most likely the last time they'll ever be there, and they're just kind of there to take it in and be pretty low-key throughout, compared to a high specialization user, which might be literally 1 in 1 million or fewer, but they have a very different presence, a very different impact to your resources, very different risk profile presented to you, trying to keep them safe and provide good activities and so forth for them, as the ranger or superintendent or what have you. Okay, so that was kind of Wednesday, talking through basic demographic effects and place attachment and bonding, to the extent that a particular site that you are managing is considered central to someone's kind of life story or their experiences, or has a very strong influence on their decision-making processes and thought processes. And we finished up with specialization, talking about, kind of basic users versus advanced users, and how their needs are in some ways similar across all people, and in some ways really markedly different. So we'll kick it off here next, talking about a thing called experience use history, which is a way to measure or get some kind of a sense of things like specialization or place attachment without necessarily asking somebody, how specialized are you? Because you don't necessarily want to have to have this whole conversation on, so here's what specialization is, where do you see yourself on the spectrum, and all that stuff. We can just ask some more basic questions and get not exactly that information, but pretty close to it. And so EUH, or experience use history, is one tool that park rangers have used to kind of measure this characteristic among a lot of individuals in their human wildlife population that they're trying to manage on site at their park. All right, so experience use history is basically going to ask about two things. And this would be like in a conversation format, or if you want to run some stats on it across 1 million users or whatever, you might pass out a survey. Super short, simple, not embarrassing, not stressful or hard survey, and get a bunch of this information in a pretty systematic way that's easy to deal with. So if you're a forester or a rec person that likes dealing with people, this is one way in which you can interact with them and know a little bit more in a good, useful way. So first thing we're asking is, how many times have you been here to this park? And it's some number from, today's my first day, so we'll call it somewhere between 0 and 1. Maybe we'll round it up to 1, give them the benefit of the doubt. And hundreds or thousands of times. And then, how many times have you been to other protected natural areas? So parks, forests, local recreation sites, like family swimming holes, everything on up to big national parks like the ones you guys are managing this semester. So we get 2 answers, and out of that, and we can ask some sort of follow-on related questions if we sort of need to or care to, but those 2 questions will get us a lot of information. So what we do is we plot on kind of a scatter plot, just like 1 dot per person on a graph of they've been to this park 1 to 5,000 times. Thousands of times is typically a local, right? And they're coming there most days of the week for their entire life, versus somebody who's, just flown into your park and they love it, but probably never going to be back because there's a bunch of other cool places. So the first thing is, on one axis, we're graphing how many times have they been to this park, and then on the other, orthogonal or 90 degree off of that axis, putting the y coordinate of that person's dot on what's the total number of visits across all protected areas, including this one. Okay? And we'll see folks kind of sort into several different kind of characteristic clumps or bins. This is called a cluster analysis, formerly in statistics at the graduate level. But you don't really need to take a bunch of stats classes to take a look at a graph of these two super basic numbers to see that they're kind of big clots or clumps or clusters of people kind of in different corners or in different middle spots along the total space available. Okay? So, if we have somebody who reports that they've been to this park one time, today's their first day, and also the total number of places and visits that they've gone to across all places is also 1, how might you generally characterize that person without knowing anything else about them, like their level of specialization or their demographics or anything like that? They've been to one park ever, and it's this park today. Is that person super specialized, most likely? Not really? Okay. What in your mind's eye, somebody who's been there one time, what do they look like? What do they know? What are they here at your park to do if this is the first park and the only park that they've ever been to?
Just like typical tourism stuff, like the main, publicized trails, if you're going to, Yellowstone, you want to see, the big main things.
Yeah. Like if you're going to Yellowstone for the first time and this is the first park you've ever been to, you've probably heard of what icon sites, as park managers refer to them, or gravity features, as geographers refer to them, that kind of pull people towards them. Where is this one visit person most likely to go first? Or try to go first, whether or not they can.
Talking about at Yellowstone?
At Yellowstone, yeah.
Old Faithful.
Old Faithful, right, exactly. Now, Old Faithful is one of literally hundreds of geothermal features, and literally one of thousands of interesting spots. Some of the spots are moving around with the wildlife herds and so forth, but everybody knows about Old Faithful. So this is useful information. If you ask 1 million visitors to Yellowstone, and they all say 1 trip total, you're probably going to expect at least 1 million pairs of feet right around Old Faithful. We're going to need to armor up that site. For any of you who've been there, you know that site is intensively managed because it is very intensively used, even almost year-round. Okay? So back in the day when visitation to Yellowstone was super small, before we had highways going there, before we had trains going there, before we had nearby airports flying people in, before we had things like the internet and easy distribution of photos and videos of Old Faithful, it was a small enough crowd that people used to do their laundry in Old Faithful. They'd throw a bunch of dirty clothes in there and basically steam clean it, right? Just like you can get a steam cleaner for your nasty couch with a bunch of roaches and resins from your roommates who are not considerate in how they consume marijuana products. You steam clean that stuff out and it's nice and clean, right? Superheated water just destroys all the oil molecules and all the smell molecules that are attached to your clothing or attached to people in the 1800s clothing. And it's also kind of funny because it blasts the clothes 100 feet high and they come fluttering down. Okay? And you see if you can catch them while also not running into the plume of superheated water. We can't do that today. We would erode so much soil, so many people would get injured in that spot. We would melt so many synthetic fiber clothes that we'd partially plug it, and we'd pollute it, and we'd have a whole bunch of injured people parboil with their skin falling off, right? 3rd-degree burns. Steam is nasty, nasty stuff. Okay? So, we can use this EUH information asking super simple questions that we're likely to get accurate answers on to help us understand what are we in for at the Old Faithful of your national park. Okay? All right, so let's say somebody says, "Oh, I've been to so-and-so national park I don't know the exact number, but I'd estimate probably 300 times. And then they say, okay, well, interesting. Total number of visits across all parks and forests and boardwalks, beaches, and all that stuff. Let's see, if it was 300 here, I'd say about 305 total. How is that person different from somebody who's a first-timer? What does that person look like in your mind's eye? Where are they going to go?
They're comfortable with the area, so they're probably doing more off-beaten stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, very comfortable. Very knowledgeable about the area. Like, using Yellowstone again, yeah, they've seen Old Faithful, and they kind of got it, thanks. Like, I'm not going to deal with those crowds anymore because I know every 90-some minutes it's going to get stupid, and I'm going to have to deal with, like, the press of humanity all around me, okay? So somebody who has been to your park many times, but not a lot of other places, has deep insider knowledge, they're more likely to go do advanced things, whether or not they're specialized, in less busy places, because they've had a chance to know about those places in a positive way. Just more chances to explore and try some stuff out and find what they like and come back to it over and over and over, hundreds of times. Or on the negative side of things, they've come hundreds of times because it's an amazing, unique, exceptional, irreplaceable national park that you're managing this semester. Maybe they have high place attachment or place bonding to it, right? Make sense? They keep coming back, even though they're really done with the crowds. They are sick of dealing with the bison jams and the bear jams at Yellowstone, where it's like every time I go around this section of the road, this 3-mile stretch takes me 45 minutes every time, and I just gotta get to a bathroom. Like, I know there are bison here. I've seen them 100 times. Get me to the bathroom, you know? So that's kind of the negative or the shadow side of somebody who's been to a place many times. They understand how good it can be, and they're measuring every subsequent trip against what's possible, not necessarily what they're most likely to hit, okay? Because parks are aspirational places. We're going to places that we prefer, and so we tend to hold them to a very high standard in terms of the experience. All right, so with that, what about somebody who has, in terms of total trips, all places everywhere, over their lifetime, they've been to 1,000 different areas. And the bigger the numbers get, the more somebody is just kind of guesstimating, right? We tend to see more round numbers the bigger they get. Like, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We might take a second to count precisely to 10. We'll start estimating at like 10 to 20, and then we're definitely just ballparking it like 20, 50, above, stuff like that. Like, we're not counting every single time out of 346, okay? So what about somebody who's been to a park or protected area total 1,000 times, 1,000 or more times, and this is the first time they've been to your park? That's different than the previous two cases. Very different kind of visitor. What does that person look like? Very experienced overall, but totally new to your park or protected area. How might that person be different than the total newbie, or the person who keeps coming to your place over and over and over? What do you think?
They may still want to see, like, the popular things that everybody else goes to, but they might not spend, like, as much time there. And would probably do some more strenuous activities that they're used to. I mean, this is just coming from personal experience, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, so they do want to see the Old Faithful. They do want to see the elk and the bears and the bison at the traffic jams. But they also want to, sort of potentially capture some other things in addition to that. So this person may or may not have a high skill or specialization level, but they sure are highly experienced. Not the same thing. They tend to be related, but we cannot make the assumption that this person is fully skilled, for example. But they are generally aware that there's more to a lot of these parks and protected areas versus those individual icon sites that everybody's likely to hit that first time, and probably the second time, and maybe the third time, and yeah, maybe if I get to it the fourth time. That sort of thing. Okay? Cool. So, this is at least 3 kinds of people so far. What's a 1 or 2 word, maybe a phrase, descriptive label we could attach to the kind of person that this is their first time at your park and any park? First, second, third time, something like that. Not just first. How could we generally label somebody like that? The exercise of sort of putting people in different buckets or bins or classifications or under certain labels with experience, use, history as kind of a sorting set of factors is to get us to this point. What's our mix of folks in each of these different labels, so to speak?
Could be like beginner, intermediate, advanced.
Beginner. Okay, good. Right on. What about somebody who has been to this park a bazillion times and not a whole bunch of other parks? We've got beginners, and then we've got, what else?
Intermediate.
Maybe.
But I feel like that'd be like you have like experience in other parks too, like not a lot, but you've been to more ones.
Okay, so if you've been to a bunch of different parks, and you've been to this one a bunch as well, like you've been to this one 300 times, and you've been to each of 20 other parks 300 times each, that person's at least intermediate. Yeah, I mean, that's a couple of thousand trips right there. That adds up fast, right? Okay, and there are people like this. There are not a ton of them, but they tend to have very distinct needs and desires and profiles versus everybody else. So we might call somebody who has been to this park a bunch of times and basically any other park few or 0 times. Might call that person a diehard or a local, right? And diehards and locals, not necessarily the same thing. Maybe they're from far away, but they keep coming right back here. So a family hunting cabin might fall under like a diehard label, not so much a local label if you have to travel to it. Okay? So we want to kind of split those 2 out. What about somebody who's been to 100 different parks, each one time? What kind of a label might we use for that person? We've actually referred to this case previously in this class, so we'll see if anybody remembers. If not, that's okay. We can come up with that label today. You've been to a bunch of different parks, each one time, and then you move on to the next. 1-ish times.
Completionist or something.
A completionist, a collector, a traveler, consummate couch surfer. Make sense? A collector's going to need some pretty different things than a diehard. Collector is, they're getting the patch in the visitor center and quick blast on through the stuff that's close by, accessible, easy, flashy. So a lot of the icon sites type of stuff, things that you can drive to more than hike 3 days to. Okay? And then, yeah, they're pretty good with that. They stick that vinyl sticker or that magnet on the back of their RV, right? And they fill in this state. A collector, for sure. Okay? What about somebody who they've been to your park many, many times, and they've been to lots and lots of other parks many, many times? Not quite a collector, who's been to a lot of parks 1 or a couple times. What's a good label for that person who's been everywhere, done everything a bunch of times? They've gone pretty deep at a lot of these places, most likely, because they've been a bunch of times at a bunch of places. What's a good descriptive label for somebody like that? Or a family like that? Or other kind of group like that? Doesn't have to be an individual. Enthusiast. Okay. So enthusiasts might be like diehards in some ways, maybe different in some ways. All right. So we see these kind of over and over and over. We see about the same 5 or 6 clusters of people that are low, medium, or high on each of these 2 variables. And we can make it a little bit more sophisticated by, for example, dividing by their age. So if somebody has only been to 5 parks, but they're only 3 years old, pretty good, actually. That's pretty good. If they've been to 3 parks and they're 95, okay, you know, they had lots of opportunities, but other things clearly were more important. So that person is less likely to be highly experienced, less likely to be specialized and highly aware of environmental degradation on site, or less likely to, you know, get way into trouble way off in the backcountry where the hardcore users get way far away from sort of the busy crowds and stuff like that. Okay? So, this is hard to know without being able to talk to visitors at your park, but what among your group members is your impression of some of these different kinds, these general groupings, these profiles? In programming, we call these different use cases, general sort of pictures of different folks arriving at your door, regardless of demographics, regardless of their, you know, language spoken or their race or ethnicity or anything like that. Just, you know, are they go big or go home? Are they here just kind of casually? Are they here and then gone so they can hit up 5 more on this one road trip kind of a person? Take a couple minutes to talk with your group, and just generally based on your understanding of where your park is, how difficult it is to get there. Is it mostly locals? Is it mostly beginners? The closer a park is to urban areas, we tend to see more of everybody, but a lot more beginners. If it's way off in the northern half of Alaska, not a lot of beginners. Make sense? All right, so talk for a couple minutes, get a sense of your beginners versus your hardcore versus your collectors versus your diehards versus your newbie first-timers, whatever else, okay?
Yeah, and I think what we're gonna have is like a lot of like
Tourists.
yeah, like cruise ship people. Yeah, because they don't like dock on the island, but they can still. I mean, we're still gonna have a lot of people like that. Yeah, and I mean, it's not a big island too, and so.
Plus a lot of it is protected too, from what I was thinking. That like you can't really like do much of this like research stuff.
Oh really? Like even the island
I don't know if
itself.
it's specifically the St. John's Island that we've been focusing on, but I'm pretty sure there was one that's pretty much all for just like research purposes.
Really? I wonder, is like the ocean area part of that?
Probably it's like the
Okay.
coral like reef.
Yeah, because there's like there's the separate like coral reef
Yeah.
thing.
Because I know they can do like scuba diving and stuff. So
Yeah.
I guess you're like a scuba diver.
Yeah, what I don't know is whether like members of the public go scuba diving there.
I guarantee there's like a resort that like
Well, yeah, there
charters it out,
probably
kind of like
is.
Mexico does,
Oh yeah.
or like Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the park and then resorts, like all
Yeah.
the way down the beach
Oh, yeah.
in all directions.
Yeah.
It's pretty common for islands.
So mostly just tourism and locals.
Yeah. Well, the locals are probably part of like the tourism industry.
Yeah. Just making money off of it.
Yeah.
And then there's people like Rebecca's friend, who she always
Oh yeah,
talks
who does
about.
research there.
Yeah. And then goes different places.
So she's still at the island?
I think she lives there now. I
Really?
think she's just like living there while she does all this stuff, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Damn, that'd be sick.
I know. Isn't it like archaeology work too?
I think she's doing like land surveying and trying to find like. Is there Like, I
Mhm.
don't even know what she's doing.
Well, I know there's still like a lot of historical stuff there too.
A lot. I forgot where it was. They're doing like infrared mapping. They found like just a bunch of ships
Oh, like
underground and stuff. They're like, were you talking about that, or was that maybe a different teacher? I don't know. Someone was talking about how they were doing like infrared like mapping of like Antarctica, and they're finding like old cruise ships and like cities and stuff, and like just from like
It won't
the
be
way they
infrared.
shift.
Water absorbs infrared completely.
Yeah,
So
I
that
don't
just
think it
shows
was
a black on an
something,
infrared
but it was something.
radiograph.
And they're doing like some weird mapping thing.
with LiDAR.
It depends a lot on the frequency light. Usually they use, instead of electromagnetic waves to query an area, it'll be like high resolution sonar or something like that.
Okay.
And you're bouncing compression waves off of the shape of things instead of the light getting absorbed by those things. The denser the medium is, the farther those sound waves go, the better it works.
It was probably Bruckner because we were talking about like land use history, so it's probably definitely
What class was that?
Bruckner.
Really?
So LiDAR is awesome for above
Maybe I
ground
wasn't there
stuff
for that
Yeah.
one.
and like near surface underground, like real close to surface. And then you can use ground penetrating radar, but that's super energy intensive and it's like a thing you carry and drag along the ground.
Yeah.
And you can find stuff a little bit further down.
Yeah, definitely not doing that.
GPR is so cool. They also used to use sound waves to map stuff underground, looking for like dinosaur skeletons and archaeology sites by firing bullets into the ground and seeing how the seismic waves sort of reflect and refract
Oh, like if
around
they
like
stop
a
one
rock
area
right
and they
here.
Keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So you put a bunch of microphones basically in a ring around it and then fire a 22 or a 12 gauge round in the ground. Pretty neat stuff.
Hit any of the bones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Accidentally just shoots
Yeah,
through
I
one,
know,
blows up
like-
all the specimen.
Well, the slug probably isn't going that
Oh,
far.
okay.
Well, maybe a couple inches.
Alright.
Just can't do it.
All right. Does anybody have any questions about this part? Is anybody getting kind of a sense of my park is probably pretty much just first timer tourists and that's it, mostly. Anybody got just specialists, like you gotta know somebody who knows something about it, as the song goes, even to just know the place exists and to much less show up there and have the skills to be safe and have a good time at a more remote park. Anything in between. Got some folks who are fairly casual, got a good mix of, more advanced, more hardcore or die-hard type folks in the mix as well. Anybody along that line?
Yes.
Okay. Right on. That makes sense. Anybody mostly locals? U.S. Virgin Islands, maybe C&O Canal. Lots and lots and lots of locals at C&O Canal. Okay. Cool. All right, so this is kind of information we collect, and we work out of this information like day to day. Like this is steering what we do in a big way. So this is very handy, sort of practical, and it's just a couple of easy questions. If you want to get super fancy with it, ask for stuff like, what's your age, to divide the number of trips to get like a trips per year as a rate. It's called a normalizing step in your analysis to figure out who am I working with, who am I working for, who are we providing this to. Normalizing by age, or normalizing things like, no, we'll get to use tensor later. All right, let's see. Cool. So, experience use history, that's a thing. Again, hard for us to kind of extrapolate for this class, but we can generally, in sort of broad terms, understand if a park is mostly locals, or mostly just casual folks, or mostly just any other category, or like the potpourri mix of all of the above. All right, next up, let's kind of dive. We've been looking at describing individual users, so we can multiply that by the total number of users that you get. Let's go inside an individual user's like brain, so cognitive processes, developmental processes, stuff like that, and talk a little bit more about what's going on inside of a person that might get them to to the very real decision step of, all right, well, I got 2 weeks vacation on my job this year. Am I going to go back to the place that I've been to 500 times? Or am I going to try out the place next to that? Or am I going to go all the way across the country to some place I know barely anything about, but it just sounds cool and exciting, and I saw some cool photos of some rock formations there or some cool cultural things going on around it with, First Nations folks, whatever. It's going to peel back the skull and look at the 45% cholesterol by dry mass brain organ of the human wildlife species. Ready? Here we go. So, first off, we want to think about what are your visitors' beliefs. What do they believe about forest recreation in general? Do they think it's healthy? Do they think it's safe? And whatever people believe is kind of what they believe. What do they believe about your park specifically? Do they know anything about your park? Is their belief of your park at all informed by reality? Like, were you or other rangers able to communicate with that person before their first trip? Like through the website, or did they call you? Or are they showing up with a bunch of impressions off of very, very sort of forced perspective media like Instagram, for example, where everything is curated and filtered and algorithmically enhanced and blasted out to specific audiences and market slices, as they're called? It can be a very, very, very skewed picture. And people base their beliefs on what they know. And we all have a lot of things that we don't know. And we don't know how much we don't know about a thing. Does that make sense? All right, so sometimes you'll hear a super dorky professor say, the older I get, the more I learn, the less I know. That sort of a thing. That's just understanding, as we widen out this circle of human knowledge in an individual or collectively as a species or society, we just see how much area is outside of what we know, and we know more about what we don't know, if that makes any sense, okay? So those are unknown unknowns, and then known unknowns, and then etc. All right, so what do your people believe? What do they believe, not about your park, but in addition to what they believe about your park, what do they believe about you as a ranger? Are you the apparatus of the government come to take away rights? Are you there? Do they believe that you're there to bail them out when they get in trouble? Not if, when they get in trouble in your area and they need some search and rescue, for example. The advent of cell phones has revealed to park rangers that a much larger proportion of society is willing to use a cell phone to try to get themselves out of trouble. And the curious effect is that the more safety gear, the more safety nets you have in terms of personal protective equipment and specialized clothing and mobility gear like snowboards or telemark skis or, lift kit, monster pickup truck or whatever, the harder and farther you'll try to go, because you feel like, I have these safety measures propping me up. Let's go a little harder. We spent all this money, we might as well use it, right? And what that does is you see safety things introduced into society. Recreations bring them to your park for the first time maybe, and they get into an area where nobody's ever been before, and they need help getting out because they're injured and they're in over their heads or whatever, and so forth. Okay? So what do they believe about you, the ranger? Is it your job to fix their problems? Is it your job to provide them lots of services? We talked just briefly earlier in the class about how the Park Service had to transition from a service ethic of providing lots of trash cans and servicing those trash cans every day as they get full to keep them from wildlife and keep them from spreading litter all over the place, to a responsibility ethic of, if you bring it in, bring it out your dang self, because we're busy as rangers. We're trying to manage this land. We're trying to keep you safe. we're off doing search and rescue on somebody else who's in trouble, we really don't want to have to like pick up your trash in the picnic area. So pack it in, pack it out. Leave no trace. Tread lightly. All these different behavioral land ethics applied especially in parks and forests and stuff like that to free you, the ranger, up. But does any particular visitor, are they even aware of leave no trace? And do they believe that leave no trace applies to them? Like, well, yeah, people should definitely not litter, but I don't see a trash can, so I'm just going to leave this here on this picnic table, and there'll be a ranger by at some point, right? And hopefully there is a ranger or a good-hearted person to pick up that person's trash before wildlife gets to it and starts eating human food and starving to death from a gut obstruction. Okay, so what are their beliefs? And their beliefs inform their attitudes. So just real briefly in 220, if you took that this spring, we talked about beliefs and attitudes and perceptions. We'll go to perceptions next. What are their attitudes? How hot or cold do they feel about any of those particular beliefs? Like they have a particularly strongly held attitude that this land is your land, this land is my land, and if I want to shoot my gun in this national park, I need to be able to do that because freedom. Okay? Or I need to be able to go to a national park and not worry about getting hit by someone's stray bullet. And I believe that the National Park Service has a role in playing kind of arbiter of where other visitors can shoot their guns so that it's much less likely that I'll catch a stray bullet. Okay? So one of my former grad students now works in Washington State for Washington State Parks, and he has problems with visitors using automatically gas-powered reciprocating firearms. We call them machine guns. They use those to cut down trees. Now, this was in the before times, before ammo prices got insane. But ammo prices are coming back down. This is going to be an issue again. If you shoot a tree enough, you will start shooting through the tree. Does that make sense? All right. It takes a lot of bullets to cut down a tree. But if you ever jump on YouTube and go to any of like the gun enthusiast channels, like that guy who spoke with a fake Russian accent and got arrested for marijuana possession and stuff like that. I forget his name. Anyway, the funny thing is when they rent a machine gun in states where you can legally do that and, squeeze off 1,000 rounds over the course of the afternoon or whatever, you see their affect. AFFECT. That is the technical term for their sort of visible emotional state. People start smiling a lot because it's fun shooting machine guns. Ask me how I know. Okay? It's lots of fun shooting machine guns. And after a while, you want interesting things to shoot at, like trees. And so, if you spend a lot of money on getting a machine gun, there are not very many of them legally ownable in the United States. But you can't get a permit for one. They're just super expensive. And if you spend $10,000 on like a legal AK-47 and 30-round banana clips, like you're gonna use it, And parks and forests are, in some cases, ready for that. It's fine up to a certain point. Cutting down trees probably overkill, but this is America, where there is no kill like overkill. So that's the thing. What are people's attitudes about what's appropriate for your park? That may not align with your professionally informed attitudes about what's appropriate or even legal at your park. So we were talking about things like, the cruise ships pulling into places like, the deep water ports around U.S. Virgin Islands or Acadia National Park and stuff like that. And back in the bad old days, they'd take on fresh water and dump their sewage either in open international waters or just as commonly right there in port. And so it'd be like, 10,000 gallons of sewage sludge, and that single discharge event is enough to sterilize, kill off the entire ecosystem of everything except the fecal material eating algae that get fertilized by that stuff. Like all the fish die, all the corals die, and stuff like that nearby. Because the attitude of some of those cruise operators was, you know what? Laws apply on land, and there's no law against doing this, and we're busy. We've got a period of hours in port. We got to cycle 5,000 people off this ship and back on the ship and get our next round of food supplies and fresh water and lighten our sewage load a bit. So we're just going to do it right here. And then laws come along to help regulate that stuff and protect the ecosystems of those ports so that that stuff has to be dumped out in dilute, deep ocean water. And it's more okay to an extent in that way, right? We're still waiting kind of for laws to catch up on the carbon emissions of shipping, including cruise ships and stuff like that, but maybe someday. What are the attitudes of your concessions? The people who are running their business, getting their livelihood off of operating guided tours or hikes or fly fishing trips or kind of adventure education, backpacking trips or whatever. What are their attitudes about what's acceptable and appropriate at your particular park or protected area? Okay. Previously this semester we've talked about, just as a reminder, some of the canoe operators at Ozark Scenic Riverways. They had to put up with that place getting designated as a federally protected waterways in the first place. And when the Park Service started imposing use density limits on different sections of that river to keep it safe and to keep it nice, the attitudes of some of these folks was, these guys are ruining our livelihood, let's take them into court. Okay? And some others' attitudes in that same situation was, you know what? They're limiting our competition. Like, yeah, we got a hard ceiling on how many people we can put in the water on a busy, hot summer day. But we don't have to deal with 50 other companies trying to open up because it's us 5 and that's it. Like, for the next 25 years, we are good to go. We know exactly how things are going to go. And we can bank on that. Okay? So attitudes in the same spot from even similar kinds of people can be really pretty different. So we want to know what people's attitudes are to the extent that they're going to kind of affect what they want to do on site and how they infect other groups positively or negatively. So people have a range of attitudes right now about the value and importance of mask mandates. Some people think, yeah, we need to protect everybody. And other people think, no, the masks trap carbon dioxide and you'll strangle yourself to death by wearing a mask for more than like 5 minutes. And every attitude in between, right? Same thing with vaccines, and same thing with everything. Everybody's got attitudes, lots of attitudes. There's a saying about everyone having an attitude. They're like, anyway. So, what are your visitors' attitudes towards your resources, towards their rights in your protected area, their responsibilities in your protected area? What are their attitudes towards your management approaches, the things you've done proactively, and the things you are sometimes, unfortunately, having to do reactively to changing on-site conditions? People see those things, and their attitudes kind of govern their responses. So they'll see you doing something on site, doing a controlled burn, or suppressing fire, or doing acid mine drainage remediation up watershed from some endangered, plant communities down slope or down watershed. And they'll perceive that, and those perceptions get filtered through whatever attitudes they have. And if they don't have a particular attitude about it, their brain is unconsciously going to go to the seemingly nearest adjacent attitude and kind of copy-paste it into this one. Okay? So, to the extent that somebody is well-educated about ecology and well-educated about risk management and visitor safety and all that stuff, they're generally going to have attitudes that align favorably with what you're trying to do as a park ranger. To the extent that they're working from a different factual basis, or a less informed factual basis, less highly trained factual basis than you as a forester, their attitudes might genuinely be pretty different. But not automatically evil or bad. They have a different set of life experiences up till this moment. So, think back to the last time you were at a visitor center or looking at a park map. A lot of the communication you're receiving as a visitor is designed to inform your beliefs and help coach you towards what are called pro-social attitudes. Like, machine guns are fun. And we have specific places on our national forest where you can shoot a lot of machine gun bullets safely for you and for other visitors and for the wildlife species that are going to have a whole bunch of lead and copper, etc., introduced into their environment. Okay? So a lot of old gun ranges, for example, are Superfund sites, which are so heavily polluted, it takes this huge, like, billion-dollar pool of money that the federal government keeps for just such an occasion. Like, it's too big for the little family-operated company that operated that gun range to pay for the cleanup of that gun range, to remove all of that historic lead from what's now the groundwater in everybody's nearby well. Does that make sense? So, attitudes shape whether folks are going to be pretty cool with, going to the area of the national forest. Usually national parks aren't for this kind of stuff, but they're either cool with that and interested in being safe and introducing other people to shooting sports and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. Or they might be pretty antagonistic and try cutting down your trees with their machine gun, and not necessarily checking the backstop. Like, what's everything behind that tree that's also getting shot up? Are there any people in a campground just past that spot? And this person doesn't know or doesn't care about that and are shooting, kind of spray and pray a bunch of projectiles across a whole bunch of other people who are just there to try to camp, and have a reasonable expectation of safety. Okay? So, what are your visitors' attitudes? Well, that long preamble, some examples. What are their attitudes? What do they hold? How do they evaluate their beliefs? Okay? And the next piece is perceptions. So, you as a trained forester, you're going to perceive a lot more environmental damage than most visitors will. So if you think back to our experience use history profiles of different kinds of visitors, somebody who's been to your park 500 times, they probably perceive things in much finer detail and with much more fidelity or accuracy than somebody who's a beginner, a first-timer to the park. Like, they're so dazzled with the excitement of checking out Old Faithful that maybe they don't see you and a bunch of your colleagues racing by in parked vehicles to try and interdict somebody who's trying to seatbelt a buff baby bison into their minivan because it looked cold. True story. But this anecdote isn't about the family that believed that it was a good thing to separate a bison calf from the herd and bring it to a visitor center in their minivan, seatbelted. This is about the visitor who's completely missing that. They're not perceiving those safety issues, those legal protection issues like the Endangered Species Act. They're not seeing somebody getting injured. They're just watching Old Faithful spout off because Old Faithful's cool. This is my first time here, and man, I finally got to see it. And oh man, okay, oh shoot, my crappy cell phone camera lens got all fogged up, but it's okay. Happening again in 90 minutes. Let's do it again. And never mind the sirens in the background. So what do your visitors perceive? So perception has a lot to do with experience use history, which is why we talked about that first. The perceptions that visitors key in on also has a lot to do with specialization. So a world-class level rock climber, Alex Honnold, or any of the other record holder free soloers of the El Capitan multi-pitch climb at Yosemite, they perceive the valley differently than somebody who's just there for the first time and doesn't know anything about rock climbing, has never thought that rock climbing is a thing at Yosemite because it's their first time and they don't think about rock climbing, No big deal, it's not wrong, they're just uninformed about that. Okay? Alex Honnold is evaluating the weather very differently. He's evaluating the crowd level down at the Merced Valley Meadows because he knows that it's going to be pretty unpleasant if there's like a music festival down there and that amplified audio is banging off of his body physically, slapping him with sound energy as he's trying to free solo El Cap and stay safe. Okay? Perceptions vary a lot among your visitors. Perceptions are also highly dependent on what you do and what you choose not to reveal to visitors. So we've talked about how one of the ways that the Park Service protects priceless, irreplaceable cultural artifacts like petroglyphs and burial sites and building ruins and granaries and stuff like that here in Southern Illinois and out in the American Southwest where Chacoan culture and stuff like that, bazillion petroglyphs everywhere, is they'll call everybody's attention to one petroglyph and they'll put a boardwalk around it and a fence in front of it and a sign, and they'll station an interpretive ranger right there at peak times when they know the most people will be there, and they point everybody to and say, look, isn't this the coolest thing in the world? And let's tell you about this culture that this came from and what we know about them and what this petroglyph informs us about their human experience, how they were totally like us and in some ways thought about the world really pretty differently than us, and isn't it amazing and remarkable and so forth, and concentrate a ton of attention right there. Hey, perceive this, pay attention to this, be right here, focus on this, and not get bored and think about the other 999 petroglyphs in that same little Red Rocks steep-walled valley, and there's no trails to any of the other ones. And there's no fences to them, because if they put up a fence, there's something behind that fence. That's interesting. So trying to hide stuff in plain sight. Security through obscurity. This technique is called in other fields like IT. Security through obscurity. Just don't call attention to it, and maybe nobody will find out. It's not a great strategy in IT, but it's a necessary one in park management. Okay? So what are your visitors' beliefs? What are their attitudes? What are their perceptions? And when you sort of throw all these things together with a fourth factor called perceived behavioral control, like how much, it kind of helps glue the other three together. Like, how much do they perceive that their attitude about how much they should be able to do, or the kinds of things they should do, or when or where they should be able to do them, how much control do they think they have over that? So in some places, like some BLM areas, we joke on summer camp that, if you want to ramp your four-wheeler off of a desert tortoise while dual-wielding automatic AK-47s, arms akimbo, live your life, do your thing. Nobody's going to know. It's the BLM, right? That's super cynical. If you're a BLM person listening to this, I love you. Huge respect to you. Nux. But there's also not a lot of ranger presence on a lot of BLM parcels, so some of the stuff is pretty unenforceable. So the perceived behavioral control kind of rolls together those perceptions, beliefs, attitudes around a certain spot. Like, if I want to go shoot a machine gun on BLM land, yeah, I can. Whether or not that's strictly legal, if nobody knows, I'm probably fine. Versus in a busy, crowded national park, like out in front of the visitor center, it's probably just as legal or illegal in that spot, but my perceived behavioral control as the person with a machine gun in that situation is there's a lot more enforcement here. There's a lot more unintended targets, not plinking targets like actual real life people that I don't want to shoot. I probably shouldn't shoot my machine gun right in front of the visitor center at this busy, popular area. And I have control over that choice because I'm the person with a gun. Okay? So, beliefs, attitudes, perceptions, roll that together with perceived behavioral control. And when you think about all of those things as kind of all simultaneous factors in an individual visitor's head, the next step downstream from those four things rolling together is, what's my motivation? What's the why? Why am I doing this? Why am I spending ungodly amounts of money on ammunition and a tax stamp for a legal, fully automatic weapon? Or why am I not spending a bunch of money on that stuff? Maybe I'd be really good at it. Maybe I'd have a really good time with a machine gun in a park. But my belief about protecting resources doesn't jive with shooting a machine gun a lot in a national park. And so I don't do it. Okay? So, beliefs, attitudes, perceptions, perceived behavioral control combine to form motivation. And we use the term motivation, not motive, because motive is when somebody's done something bad. Motivation is good, right? We want people to come to your park. We want the maximum number of people that we can possibly sustain to come to your park. Over and over. Every year. That would be awesome. We're doing a good thing. That's half of the fundamental mission that you are a part of this semester, to protect, that is preserve, resources, and to provide top-shelf, world-quality access and opportunities for recreation on site. So we want lots of folks to show up. And we want to understand what their motives are before they arrive or as they're arriving, so that we can make sure that we are satisfying the sustainable motivations for showing up, and that we are providing a healthier or better or more sustainable alternative to those motivations we can't. Like if somebody shows up to U.S. Virgin Islands to do a ton of fishing, and we just can't support that much fishing because the actual ponds inside the park versus the ocean like right next door, they just can't handle a ton of fishing before they're depopulated and those populations collapse. We could probably find some other good options for fishing. It's an island in the Caribbean. Like, there's other fish nearby, but we just can't do it right here at this pond. All right? So if we know that that pond is attached to somebody's motivation for fishing nearby, we can do something about that. Okay? So we've kind of got at the idea of motive earlier in the semester, thinking about, so why are people showing up to your park? Right? We see evidence of motive from the far side of it. So after we know what the motivation is, we see the actual behavioral attempt and the outcome of it. And the activities that you guys and gals have been learning about on site for your park has a lot to inform about motivations, because you see the activities that come out of it. Okay? So when you, the park ranger, are out in front of like all of the important motivations that are bringing people to your park, everybody's happy. We got enough lodging, we got enough trails of the right intensity going to the right places that satisfy, that scratch those people's itches, those motivations, to go see the icon sites at your park, to bring their fishing rod and get some fishing done, but maybe from a beach instead of from the little pond that can't handle it. Okay? And we start to see impacts racing upward in a literally exponential way, up to a point when we've made bad guesses about motivations. And we blow our budget on enforcement giving people tickets, throwing people in park jail, ejecting people from the park and banning them for life, when we're not understanding our visitors' motivations for why they're showing up in the first place. Because they bought plane tickets, they bought gear, they took time off of work, or they're retired, and so forth. And they're committed. Like, by the time they show up, they've got a lot of momentum, okay? So when we hit that motivation, we've got something ready for them. Awesome. We are ready to go. Everybody has a good time. You feel like you're an effective park ranger. They feel like they've had a great trip. On to the next day, okay? And when we're not thinking about our human wildlife population, the why, the motivation, and the underlying beliefs, attitudes, perception, and perceived behavior control that shape those motivations, it's chaos, it's disaster, okay? So this is like when, before there was a U.S. National Park Service, in the mid-1800s, people from New York City and Boston and so forth would go, they would take stagecoaches, literal carriage rides from the big city out to Niagara Falls. It's close enough that you could do that before there were any paved highways or anything like that, before there were airplanes or whatever. The stagecoach drivers, because it was an unregulated, totally sort of self-started thing, they realized, okay, once we get these people away from the big city and, like, the police, these are folks who have disposable time and money to get to a place like Niagara Falls, all the way across New York on the border with Canada. What if we just, kind of like told them some stories along the way to kind of just pass the time? It's a long stagecoach drive. And their motivation is to enjoy a holiday, so we can make the travel to and from part of that holiday. We can make people happier by telling them some stories. Environmental interpretation was not a professional discipline in the mid-1800s yet. So people were mostly making up stories and just totally bullshitting their visitors. Like, oh yeah, well that plant is, the Saluki bluebell. It's super rare. It's actually incredibly poisonous. Native Americans, at this time they wouldn't have used the term Native Americans, but they use this in poultices when they get shot by arrows, and has almost miraculous regenerative capabilities. That's really amazing stuff. And it's like not any of those things. It's like a violet, or like some other completely different species that actually exists, and is not used in those ways for native or traditional herb uses. And it got to the point where the motive for some of those stagecoach riders became to embellish those stories so much that it got kind of ridiculous, and people started calling bullshit on the stagecoach drivers, saying, to quote Anchorman, "I don't believe you." And then the stagecoach drivers, get a little insulted, and they stop the stagecoach halfway to Niagara Falls and say, "Hey, I don't appreciate you talking to me that way. And I've been working really hard on my storytelling. Don't you want to give me a tip?" And it's super uncomfortable because you're in the middle of New York in 1835 or whatever. There's nobody else around to help you. It's like the worst kind of Uber driver. Like the serial killer ones that'll pick you up and then just murder you, It wasn't quite that bad, but it was moving that direction. And so we get organizations like the Park Service to actually figure out, starting 1916, what do these visitors want? Not just to hear a bunch of bullshit stories on the way to a big waterfall, but what do they actually want? What do they believe? What do they understand? What are their attitudes about this stuff? Let's clean this up a lot and make it a lot safer and more inviting and welcoming to people, and validly connecting with the reasons they're coming for and working real hard to prep for. That make sense? All right, so most of us are foresters. Most of us are super introverted, and talking with our visitors about, so, what brought you here today? What are your motivations really? Doesn't sound particularly appealing, but it's super critical. So, for the folks who do like talking to people, you are You are sort of the surgical instrument for cutting out ignorance in terms of your professional colleagues having no idea why people are arriving and providing the wrong things for them, and protecting wildlife in a ready, fire, aim sort of belated way because they don't understand why people keep running towards the bison for a selfie with it. That's a motivation. It's not a very wise one, it's not safe, but it's totally a motivation. It happens over and over and over and over. I don't think I downloaded it. There's a video posted on social media the other day of a fellow holding open the door to a little like cafe or diner or restaurant. I think this was in Texas. And second guy has his truck pulled up right against the door and rolls coal into this restaurant and then speeds off. That's technically a recreation activity. Somebody's doing that for fun, blasting people with a couple of hundred different carcinogens in the form of diesel smoke, sooty diesel smoke. It's a big black cloud. And then driving off and deriving some entertainment benefit from that. So when you see folks doing negative things in parks, very unsafe things, purposively negative things that are dangerous to themselves or to other people or to wildlife or the resources you're protecting, it's not about that particular act. It's not about rolling coal. It's about that damaged person's super screwed up childhood and messed up relationship with their father, or whatever it is, right? Like, nobody wakes up one morning in a vacuum and says, I want to roll coal on a restaurant full of people. Like, something happened in that person's head or their dead soul to like bring them to that point. Does that make sense? So in a more positive, more constructive way, we want to have those conversations. We want to query these things. We want to learn about our visitors so that it's a super positive thing. Wow, you flew 4,000 miles from a different continent to join us at this park today. That's amazing. What do you know about this park so that I can help you connect with your reason for spending 4,000 miles of travel one way to get here in the first place? And if they say, oh, well, we actually don't really care about Old Faithful. We've got a bunch of geothermal features back where we come from in southern Central Africa. We're actually good on that. We'll probably catch it on the way out, maybe. But what we really came for here is we want to get back in the hills. Okay, so now as that ranger, you're having a very different conversation with that person based on understanding what their motivation is for their trip. Okay? So we don't want to, like we were talking about last Wednesday, treat everybody as the average camper who doesn't exist. Sort of that averaged out composite that removes all of the variability, all the individual character out of each person arriving to your park, okay? So this isn't something we can do off-site in a scenario running kind of way this semester, a problem-based learning approach. But this is something that the Park Service spends lots of millions of dollars on because it's different at every park, in every season of every park, right? Different, like a winter trip to Yellowstone is a very different beast than an August trip to Yellowstone. So the answers you're going to get are going to shift over time within seasons. And they're also going to shift over long periods of time, like decadal trends, for example. You know, changes in technology, changes in demographics, changes in X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. Okay? All right, so that's a super long deep dive into attitudes and preferences and perceptions. For those of you who are interested in this side of park rangering versus the sort of physical resource management side of it, this particular thing is called the theory of planned behavior. We spent like a couple of minutes on it in Forestry 220 Intro to Forest Recreation, just introducing the concept of it. Now we're kind of picking it apart and really starting to apply it across some examples, everything from rolling coal. How did that person arrive at that decision to do that behavior before the problem behavior happened? What did they believe? That person clearly believed they could get away with it, right? Their attitude was that somebody else's health doesn't matter as much as my entertainment. So I'm going to roll coal on them. All the way up to more positive cases of, why did you fly here from southern Central Africa? Are you here for Old Faithful, or can I introduce you to a million and one other amazing things that are about Yosemite, or Yellowstone here, that you might not have even known about? Or if there is something specific that you do know about, I want to help you get there in the most sustainable and enjoyable way. All right? So that's a super deep dive on that. Let's move on past that to just a brief chat about something called, this is a slightly controversial theory for reasons of sexism and racism, but the basic idea is useful enough. It gets weird when you get into some particulars, but just super basically, what is the general stage of someone's moral development? That is, this is another way of asking, why do people exhibit the behaviors that they do? Why do they make the choices that they do that lead to enacted behaviors? All right, so we got 3 basic stages of moral development. We've got, and then each of those is broken down into substages. We don't care about that at the undergraduate level. The first stage is pre-conventional moral development. You do things relative to your belief or expectation about rewards or punishments. So little children, for example, would be classified as pre-conventionally morally developed. The carrot or the stick, to use a metaphor. So for people who are pre-conventionally morally developed, we have laws and regulations that interpret laws into day-to-day actions. And we have punishments for crimes. If you shoot off fireworks in Shawnee National Forest, not a national park, but close enough for this example, on a high fire advisory day, and a forest protection officer sees you, you're going to get a couple $100 love note and or the cost of shutting down the wildfire that you start. We have to have that punishment in place for the people who want to shoot off their July 4th fireworks in a place that it is not ecologically suitable for that, because they don't care about ecological suitability. They want to shoot off fireworks. But they don't because they don't want to get arrested. Okay, so sociopaths would be pre-conventionally morally developed. They don't do certain things like kill people generally because they don't want to go to jail. That's the calculus in someone like that's head. Okay? You do things for a direct reward or to avoid a direct punishment. So corporal punishment goes in and out of fashion, things like spanking a baby or whatever. This class is not going to tackle whether that's good or bad, but it's a direct response to an undesirable behavior in a child when people choose to use corporal punishment. When you give somebody a gold star for coming into class that day, that's a pre-conventional moral development technique to reward somebody for showing up, you know? It's like a kind of a low value reward, but hey, it's a gold star, right? The next stage up, which is where most of us live as adults. Some folks never get out of pre-conventional moral development, and you just gotta slap them with fines or throw them in jail when they do bad things, or they won't stop. Most of us live in a so-called conventional moral development stage, and some of us will get all the way to post-conventional, but most of us live in the middle step, the fat part of the bell curve of the population, on the conventional stage of moral development. So we've grown out of needing spankings. We've grown out of going for gold stars for attendance. We do things based on how we perceive others who are important to us will feel about that behavior. That was a very long sentence to parse verbally. So, each of us has people that are important to us. Family is super high importance early and drops somewhat in importance over time. Friends, super important typically to most college-age people. We also have sort of a wider, less intense ring of people outside of that, like professional network. And we know that people in our professional network are aware sometimes of our choices and behaviors. And then out beyond that, we've got kind of like the general public, that sort of anonymous public, John Doe, everybody around me that I don't know who they are. All right? Most of us make choices to start a behavior or avoid a behavior based on what we think people in those successively wider rings are going to think about it. So, for example, we get phrases like, ew, this is disgusting, smell it. Right? That's gross. But that's a funny thing to someone whose response you care about. So you're cooking in the kitchen and you make something that doesn't quite go right and it just looks like microwave vomit or something and you're like, this is awful, try it. And it's haha funny, but you said, hey, this is awful, try it, the behavior, because you thought the person you're offering it to would also find it funny. Does that make sense? You're not going to say that same thing to somebody in your professional network and hold it out to them and try to gross them out too, because you think they would give you a negative response. Okay, so conventional moral development has you constantly evaluating, all right, so what do my classmates think about me, on a field trip, sneaking out of the campsite late at night and going to buy a bunch of beer while the professor's out, cold, and stuff like that. Some folks will sneak out and buy a bunch of beer because they value the opinions of their classmates, thinking that they're cool doing that, more than they value the irritation of the professor, like, the next morning finding you or the person making this choice outside of their tent, mostly disrobed, face down in a pool of their own vomit. I mean, like real 80s rocker vibe. They care about the professor being irritated or embarrassed about that less than how cool it's going to be with the classmates in the moment. All right? So the more morally developed you get, as you get towards post-conventionally morally developed, you care about the opinions of more distant people. So, for example, a lot of social media is so popular because people post stuff because they think somebody's going to like it. And then people can monetize that. So if any of you, at least initially, started college because your parents thought you should, and you're not real sure one way or the other, so yeah, whatever. That's a conventionally morally developed response. Somebody, hopefully, that you care about, you have halfway healthy relationship with your parents. They think going to college, in our case here at college, is generally a good idea for your career and stuff like that, and your intellectual development. And, if you weren't quite on board with that yet, but you did it anyway, that was a conventional moral development response. Okay? Or if you refrain from passing gas loudly in class because you don't want the professor, an authority figure nominally, to look at you disfavorably, even though you think some of your classmates would find it funny in the moment, that's also a conventional but slightly sort of more highly developed moral sense than somebody who, farts anyway and suffers the professor kind of eye-rolling and all of their friends kind of laughing at that joke in class. Okay? Post-conventional moral development is you care less about what people think of you, and you don't need basic rewards and punishment schemes You evaluate things according to an ideal, or a principle, or an ethic. Even if it's unpopular, even if your friends and maybe even your family look negatively on that choice and the behavior that comes out of it, but you did it anyway because it serves a higher ideal. Researchers would call it a post-conventionally or highly morally developed person. Okay? Not a lot of people really spend most of their life making their hard decisions and enacting hard behaviors based on a post-conventional or highly developed moral sense. Most of us we're going to spend the gas driving home for Thanksgiving because mom's going to lay on the guilt if we don't. Conventional. Versus, it is good and right and noble to spend irreplaceable, irrecoverable time with family before they're gone. Post-conventional decision process versus sort of a guilt-laden process of a conventional person both deciding on the same trip to the same people for very different reasons. Does that make sense? All right, so what does any of this have to do? So, like, leave no trace is a land ethic. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. You can travel and camp on durable surfaces because you don't want to piss off your professor on a field trip. Conventional moral development. Or you can travel and camp on durable surfaces on that same field trip because you want to save the earth. And one tiny little microcosmic way to do that is to not trample it to death. And maybe you don't even care what your professor thinks, or if they even notice that you're only traveling and camping on durable surfaces. But you're following a higher ideal, the land ethic of leave no trace. And so that's very important to you. And that governs your decisions in a very different way. Again, most people generally don't spend most of their time in that space. It's fairly rare. But people who go on hunger strikes, for example, they clearly don't care what other people think. They are taking a serious bodily harm behavior into action because they believe some important ideal about it. Everybody's free to disagree with that ideal or whatever, and call that person an idiot or really admire them for it. But that's fairly rare to see in practice. When you ask visitors, or when you sort of probe around this, how morally developed are my visitors generally speaking, lots of visitors will respond that they are very pro-social, that they are highly morally developed, they're doing things according to an ideal or an ethic. But as it turns out, that's fake. They are saying those answers because they think you, the ranger, want to hear those answers. That's a conventional level of moral development, not post-conventional, not the ideal seeking. It's the, I want to please this person or have them not mad at me kind of thing. Does that make sense? They will lie to you as a ranger because they're telling you what they think you want to hear. And so it's really funny when, like, they think you want to hear something and they're clearly telling you that, and that's not what actually you want to hear from them. And then you're like, well, actually, I pulled you over for this other reason. They're like, oh, yeah, well, no, yeah, I mean, that too. Like, that's literally why I was doing that, you know. And you see them kind of like backpedal and so forth because of this so-called socially acceptable response bias. People say things to you as the authority figure, the ranger, the park manager, the expert, the professional, that they think you want to hear in order to avoid your ire or to please you and to feel cool as a result. Make sense? All right, cool. So, how do we use our understanding of where people are or are not on a moral development scale in park management? Again, the center of mass is at conventional. So, Japanese parks, national parks, really lean hard into conventional messaging. Like, there are signs at parks, and I don't have time to pull them up right here, but if you're curious, we can take a look after class. There are signs that are translated sort of loosely into English, that say, you know, how ruinous for your lungs is it to smoke a cigarette, but how embarrassing is it for you to blow the smoke into the face of the visitor behind or next to you. Literally, there are signs like that. Like, it's a little arch sounding, but it's like, in your own words, how would you translate that message? Like, do or don't do X, Y, Z. How ruinous for your lungs is it to smoke a cigarette, but how embarrassing is it for you to blow the smoke into the face of someone nearby? In your own words, how would you turn that into a sign at a national park? Even though it's already a sign at Japanese national parks. How would you take the idea behind that message and rephrase it for your park? I'll give you an example to help you start. No smoking. Okay. A no smoking sign is a pre-conventionally focused sign. The implication is, if it says no smoking, there's probably some kind of a punishment for smoking near the sign, right? Pre-conventional. What might be a conventional way to say no smoking? Phrased in terms of what other people will think about the smoker. What kind of a message can you communicate in a sign, or verbally, face-to-face, if you're the ranger? What's a conventional or post-conventional way to say no smoking? Or $500 penalty for smoking in this area would be another example of a pre-conventional, a low moral development message, a threat of a fine, a punishment. What's a conventional way to lower the smoking in an area? This is a slightly harder question than some of our open-ended questions earlier.
Could you say something about how it affects the environment?
If you're going for post-conventional, hey. The bats at Mammoth Cave are extremely sensitive to particulate pollution. Won't you join us in helping to preserve the bats of Mammoth Cave? Won't you join us in helping to preserve is a post-conventional message. It's appealing to an ethic. I never met a bat before. I don't care how bats feel about me. But if I follow an ethic of preserving species that are important or threatened or endangered or fragile or sensitive to cigarette smoke, I would love to join in the park service and everybody helping to save the bats. I'm down for that if I'm post-conventionally morally developed. All right, so what might be a conventional way of saying no smoking? Conventional level of moral development. Phrased in terms of how other people might look upon the smoker favorably or disfavorably. This is a really good exercise. We're going to spend a lot of time in the last part of our semester wrestling with things like, what do we say to our visitors? How do we say it? Given that we know a lot of them are conventional, some of them are pre-conventional, some are post-conventional. So, conventional message, phrased in terms of how folks might respond positively or negatively to the smoker. What can we put on a sign that helps the smoker think about that?
My job over the summer, it was like an outdoor restaurant and stuff, and people would like just automatically smoke because it's like outside their stuff and stuff. And when we would tell them, a lot of people would get either really pissed off or they'd just like go to the smoking area. but like when they would get mad, we'd just be like, yo, there's like a family of like little babies, and just like point out like the kids or like their animals. Because then if like you say like it's affecting the kid, not because they don't really care if like I'm sitting there, but if they see like a baby, they might be like, okay.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, we've got some other visitors that are kind of asthma sensitive, and they really struggle with being near smokers. Could you just head over to the smoking area? Like, we got a awning in case it's raining. We got, strong airflow over there. It's totally cool. It's like 10 steps away. Could you just head over there real quick? That's a great example, okay? Things like, please be considerate of your fellow visitors. Have you ever seen a sign like that anywhere? Please be considerate, XYZ specific thing. That's a conventional kind of thing, and that's why we see signs like that all over the place. So this is different than signs like we'd see on the highway or the street that are like wayfinding and safety, like stop signs so you don't drive through and kill a bunch of people. This is more like restaurants and national park visitor centers and bars and music venues and stuff like that. We're trying to get people to think just for 3 seconds, oh yeah, the world doesn't totally revolve around me. There are other people trying to live and breathe. So what should I do or what shouldn't I do? Conventional level message. Good deal. All right. Let's see. In wilderness management, we talked about... No, we'll get to that later. All right, so let's see. I'll get to that later as well. Let's see. Okay, so we've kind of gone into a bit of a deep dive into the individual user's head. Having talked about individual users outside of their heads last Wednesday and first part of today, up through experience use history. Next, we're gonna zoom back out again from brain past the individual to their particular group and trip. All right, so it's a new section for the trip characteristics. Some of this we briefly alluded to, but we want to kind of tie it all together and get after sort of considering all these factors together. All right, so we want to mindful of the individual and all the things that go into them. Think about now each individual in their group and all of the people in that group, whether it's a school field trip or a field class like summer camp, or a family trip like the summer vacation, everybody jump in the SUV and go kind of thing, or the retirement tour across all the parks in the lower 48 or whatever. We need to know some things about what those trips look like. First of all, group size and group nature. So how many people are in the group? A group of 2 is going to need some different things and do some different things, impact some different speeds. If it's a group of 1 versus a group of 50. Okay. So, what's the group size? What is the group composition in terms of what's the aggregate demographics across that group? We're going to need some pretty different setups for Greyhound buses full of tourists from China or Japan or other Southeast Asia, or like Pacific Rim countries, all showing up with a tour company and rolling through your park, and probably a couple of others on their Greyhound bus, or showing up in their family group, but also as part of the larger sort of tour group off of a cruise ship. Or if they're showing up as an individual family unit, is it a young family with tiny little kids? They're going to need different trails than a couple who are both 25, freshly married, and not quite tied down with a mortgage and stuff like that yet, and they're out to bag a whole bunch of national parks and go ham on this trip. Okay? So we need to know what's the range of our visitors. And for most of our parks, we're going to assume what is the absolute maximum possible range. Could we have a group of 30, 95-year-old people with a tour company and all of the specific needs that those folks are going to have? Absolutely. At some point, that's going to happen. Are we going to have like 10 school buses of local school kids, none of whom are older than 7 years old, all descending on our visitor center and some of our trails at the same time, at that same park as those 90-year-olds? At some point, that's going to happen, for sure. Okay? Maybe not to northern Alaska, but most other places will get big school groups. It can be hundreds of kids at a time. So you gotta make sure that you're ready for that. So what are the group characteristics? Size. What's the group composition? Here's one for you that we don't normally think about in forestry, but I see it every day in forestry, and you're not going to be able to unsee this after we talk about it. What are the status group dynamics inside that group? What are status group dynamics? Who's trying to be cool in that group? Who's the natural leader of that group? Who's kind of the super introverted, like thousands of words fewer per day on average spoken, and they like it that way? Member of the group or members of the group? Who's got a crush on somebody else in the group? Who's the decision maker for the group? Is it like a super chill, communal, consensus-based group? Like, how do we all feel about which trail to go on today? And does anybody have any suggestions? Is it possible that we could hike all of the trails that everybody wants to hike today? Or do you have a more sort of type A type person leading the group, or at least steering the group without being a real leader, that says, fuck all of y'all, I came here to hike Trail X, and the rest of you are losers if you don't come along, creating a negative social pressure in conforming to that expectation. Okay? So, can you think of any status group dynamics in any of your groups, social groups, not necessarily at a park, but just like a group that you identify yourself as a part of? Fraternity, your hall at Stiegel, your major, Society of American Foresters club meeting at 6:30 on Wednesday or whatever. Can you think of a group that you identify yourself as part of, either now or in the past, where you've experienced an interesting or unexpected status group dynamic? Where the group was a thing, and then all of a sudden everybody's in jail and half of the people are mad and the other half are like, yeah, this is awesome. Status group dynamics, okay? So for any of these groups coming to your park, do you have facilities, do you have trails, do you have messaging, contacts with people that are like effectively interfacing with the status group dynamics? For example, I got cussed out over walkie-talkie one time leading a trip to Mammoth Cave because a popular and highly vocal member of the class was socially prominent and highly skilled at getting other people to do what he wanted them to do. And he was angry at me for taking us on a field trip to a dry county at that time. I don't know if it is or not. They've gone back and forth a couple times. Sometimes it's a bit of a draft. But anyway, and sometimes they have like cases of beer right in the camp store like 100 yards from our tents. So I just don't know. It's worth Googling. You know, whatever. And this person was mad at me because as the professor, I don't care if people want beer. Like, if they really need it, they can go get it. You know, like, we're all adults here. And as long as you're not breaking any laws or making anybody unsafe, that's fine. But I got cussed out because this person, it was important to them in the context of his classmates that, like, you get to drink with them. That was very important. And so when I just mentioned that it was a dry county we were in and he was going to have to drive quite a bit to go find alcohol, you know, I got a very creative and long series of expletives. Vulgar argot, if you will. And it was funny. Because as the professor, I'm not really part of that peer group of college students, right? I'm with the group. I'm leading the group logistically and educationally and stuff like that, but socially, that's not automatically my role. Now, some professors are super charismatic and just awesome to have around the campfire with you, right? That's cool. I hope to be that person someday, but I'm kind of an introvert. I think Ruffner gets along well with a lot of people, like with everybody, right? Super cool dude. So the status group dynamics there tend to involve Dr. Ruffner in a positive way. Like he helps model what the group is going to be doing next and informs the group what it's going to be doing next and kind of keeps things moving forward in a very healthy and constructive way. Sometimes a status group dynamic is very negative, or some would use the word these days, toxic, where it's negative goals that the group's effort gets put towards. And if that's a thing with any particular group at your park, what could that look like? So, one that's possible scenario, without saying how likely any of these are, and steering well clear of stereotypes. Let's say there's a couple, a romantic pair at a park, and they're camping, and one half of the couple is super gonzo. They want to go hiking, get some awesome photos, like real far back in the forest and stuff like that. We want to get up real close and personal with some wildlife. Let's go hard before we go home. And the other half of the couple is like, okay, but actually, what if we just like hung around the lodge today? Like they have really good coffee. And did you know we could get steaks at the lodge? We could go hiking. Or we can have steak. We probably don't have time to do both today. What if we did steak and coffee? In no particular order. Maybe multiple times. We could have steak for lunch and for dinner. And the other one's like, no, fuck that. We're going hiking. Right? So who gets to decide what that pair does? Right? That's obviously an internal decision and conversation between them. And, you know, maybe it turns into stuff like, oh, you're just like your father, and I knew you were going to do this, and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's just like, you know, sometimes couples break apart under duress. And sometimes parks introduce people to duress. Not recommended to bring your significant other on summer camp. It's been messy in the past. Anyway, so it's fine if that's just sort of an internal conflict in that group according to the kind of the power dynamics of that group.